Welcome, everyone, to Social Tech, Empowering Your Workers Through Employee Ownership. My name is Antu Nguyen with the Owner to Owners program and Employee Ownership NYC initiative. Wanted to thank everyone for taking time out of their very busy day to join us to learn more about this exciting program brought to us through the mayor's office. We're going to learn about employee ownership related to businesses in the tech sector striving to positively impact workers, community, and the industry at large. Employee-owned businesses are businesses owned and managed in part or completely by the people who work there. And businesses can start as employee-owned enterprises or become employee-owned with the support of free city-funded services provided by owner-to-owners and the Employee Ownership NYC initiative. You can begin to explore employee ownership today at no cost by visiting owner2, that is the number 2, owners.nyc, or by calling our free hotline at 646-363-6592. Later today, we'll get an opportunity to hear more about the services that Owner to Owners provides for businesses that, again, are completely free of charge thanks to the city's support. Today, we have a fantastic discussion planned featuring several businesses and tech platforms that are moving beyond traditional corporate venture capital-backed models to include employee ownership as a critical part of the business model. We'll have a short Q&A session following our discussion. And if you have questions as the discussion is taking place, please use the Q&A feature or chat them to our panelists. Now, I want to introduce everyone here to Deputy Mayor Phil Thompson. Phil Thompson is the Deputy Mayor for Strategic Initiatives and oversees agencies and mayoral offices, including the Democracy NYC, the Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprises Program, the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development, and the Young Men's Initiative. Deputy Mayor Thompson is a longtime champion of worker ownership as a means to close racial and gender wealth gaps and build equitable, flourishing communities where everybody benefits. His office has elevated owner to owners and employee ownership as a means to help save businesses in New York City post-COVID and improve the lives of workers. In his role, he also serves as co-chair on the city's task force on racial inclusion and equity, and as a commissioner on the city's Racial Justice Commission. Deputy Mayor Thompson also has an extensive background in New York City government, having previously served in the Dinkins administration as the Deputy General Manager for Operations and Development, and before that, having served in the Manhattan Borough President's Office. Now I'll pass it off to Deputy Mayor Thompson. Welcome.
Thank you, Ann. I wanted to begin today by just saying that worker ownership, employee ownership is a very old concept, and actually it was the original American dream. Thomas Jefferson, Madison, many of the founders believed strongly that in order for democracy to work, that workers had to have an ownership stake in places where they worked, so that every day when they went to work, they would be involved in making decisions. They would be involved in making investments and taking responsibility for their decisions. And that these skills that people would learn every day on the job were actually vital skills for a good citizenry, for voters. So when voters went to elect someone, they actually had their own experiences to draw upon to say, this would be a good person to run our city or run our state or run the country. That vision was really opposed and beaten back mainly by slave owners initially, who said, well, how can we have democracy in the midst of a slave economy when that's how we make our money? You can't like free all the slaves. We won't be able to have an economy. or at least not this economy. And that fight went on right through until the Civil War. And many people remember or talk about the 13th Amendment, which came at the end of the war, as the amendment that eliminated chattel slavery, slavery of people of African descent. But if you read the 13th Amendment, it not only outlaws slavery, it also outlaws something called involuntary servitude. And involuntary servitude in the 1860s meant people who were forced to work for an employer because they have no other means of survival. And in the 1860s, that was considered oppressive and anti-democratic, so much so it was part of the 13th Amendment. What happened after the Civil War was there was a period of time called Reconstruction when the American Black men won the right to vote through another constitutional amendment. But more broadly, the federal government said, you know, we have to reconstruct how the entire country runs, not only politically, but economically. We have to rethink this whole thing. And then you started seeing a wave of, you know, workers organizing. You started seeing the beginnings of cooperatives. You started seeing strikes. You started seeing people moving west and getting land through the federal land grant program so they could run their own farms, have their own small businesses. And there was an immense backlash to that, a violent backlash to that, in which Northern business owners, wealthy businesses, conspired with former Confederates to beat back this whole democratization movement. And that's where Jim Crow came from. Black people couldn't vote for another 100 years, but that's also when the private securities, the Pullmans and others, Pinkertons, were used to beat back labor. Many labor leaders jailed, attacked, sometimes shot. And democracy as a whole was set back. So that battle reemerged again in the 1930s following the crash and the New Deal, same fight. And the fight went on again in the late 1960s and early 1970s. And in the 1970s, there was a book by a business professor at MIT named Lester Thurow. And Lester Thurow said, you know, it's outrageous that corporate CEOs make 30 times what workers in their companies make on average. 30 times. Isn't that an outrageous figure? How can a CEO be worth that much when the workers are doing the work? Well, today, corporate CEOs make 300 times what ordinary workers make. And it has nothing to do with company performance. Companies in Europe average closer to 30-1, not 300-1. They're competitive, they perform well. And it's simply that our style of running businesses actually took a lot from the slave plantations. And the idea became, the worse you exploit your workers and the higher profit margins you have for your investors, the better your company is, the more efficient and effective it is. Not true. Not true. Companies where workers or employee-owned companies do really well, the workers are happier, they're better compensated, they take more responsibility in their work because it's theirs. But also, worker-owned companies really help develop citizens. Going back to Thomas Jefferson's original idea, it helps build good citizens. And we see the results of when business doesn't cultivate good citizenry. That was slavery, but that's also what's been happening in recent decades, where people just go to work to make money. They don't learn anything about how to work with other people, about how to run a big organization, about democracy. And next thing you know, we have people like Donald Trump storming the Capitol building. These things are related to one another. So in New York, we view building worker ownership as actually part of our democracy movement in the city. And we hope it spreads nationally. And I know you're going to hear from some folks right here who are doing this work. But the idea that the economy is somehow not part of how society as a whole operates, it ought to operate under a different value system than that of democracy, than that of uplifting people from all backgrounds, of people having a voice no matter where they are, that businesses ought to be run like dictatorships. That idea came from a slave plantation, and we need to reject it. And so that's what our effort is about. We've actually received a lot of 26,000 hits on our website. We've 300 calls on our hotline, over 100 businesses going through a conversion process. But we think this is an idea that has intrinsic merit. We think that it's going to be the wave of the future, because more and more as companies become more high tech and people use the internet more and have more choice, folks are going to want to have a voice where they work, and B, consumers are going to want to support companies that actually uphold the values that they hold dear. And most people do value democracy. Most people do value equity. So that's what this is all about from our perspective. So looking forward to the conversation, and thank you for taking a few minutes to listen to me.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Thompson, and thank you for your words challenging us to rethink not just the work that we do and making it forward-facing, but how we do that work, and for connecting the dots between the way we think that work should be done right now and how that is actually can be traced to the dark history of the United States and of labor history in the US, as well as the culture that arises from it. So with that said, thinking in terms of what's possible and how we can do it, I want to turn it over now to our panel moderated by Nathan Schneider. Nathan is an assistant professor at the University of Colorado Boulder. He's a journalist who writes about religion, technology, and democracy, and currently exploring models for democratic ownership and governance for online platforms and protocols. He's the founder of the Media Enterprise Design Lab and author of Everything for Everyone, the Radical Tradition That Is Shaping the Next Economy, which captured the momentum of the broader cooperative movement in the wake of the 2008 financial crash. Joined with Nathan today is a panel made up of some great folks representing tech platforms and businesses, including Sylvia Morse from Up and Go, Troy Walcott from People's Choice Communications, and Austin Roby from Ampled. So I'll pass it over to Nathan. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. And that was an incredible introduction. Knowing that history, recognizing that employee ownership is part of a longer struggle for democracy and freedom is so important. And today we're going to really focus on the role of technology and technology companies in the midst of this. Technology has always been in the part of these questions of freedom and servitude. I mean, the cotton gin was an invention that could have been used in many ways, but was used to supercharge the institution of slavery. Today, we're facing some pretty parallel dilemmas where a lot of powerful new technology is coming into our world. The question for us is not, do we like technology or not, so much as how do we govern our technology? Who will be the owners and the people to whom this technology is accountable? And the projects we'll hear from today are really exciting examples of how worker ownership can be a way of putting technology under the control of democratic structures in businesses that are healthy and thriving and capable of providing a real alternative to the kind of return to feudalism we're seeing in the rise of big tech platforms that are so often unaccountable to the people who depend on them. So I want to turn to our really excellent panel here and ask each of you first to just say a little bit about what your business is and introduce what you're doing, who the workers are who are owning the business, and what it does for its customers. And then we'll get into some more meaty questions later. But we'll just go down the line here, starting with Sylvia Morse from Up and Go.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. So I'm Sylvia Morse, she, her, and I work at Center for Family Life in Sunset Park, which is a community-based organization that, among other things, has been incubating worker-owned cooperatives, primarily in domestic work sectors, since 2006. And so I've been supporting Up and Go since it was an idea. It was launched in 2007, and Up and Go is essentially a cooperatively owned platform where people can book cleaning services, both home cleaning and commercial cleaning services. And it is a cooperative of worker cooperatives. So the domestic workers, who are primarily immigrants, almost entirely women, majority Spanish speaking, English language learners, they control the brand, they co-designed the platform with us, they set the prices and policies, and they work together to jointly market their businesses through this platform.
Fantastic. And that's a great example of how you can get larger scale while still keeping small worker-owned businesses. So it's Up and Go functions as a kind of federation of smaller businesses, kind of hitting the best of both worlds, and in larger scale and kind of governable size of the member businesses. Next, I'm going to turn to Troy Walcott of People's Choice Communications. This is a really exciting new project. Troy, tell us what you're up to.
Hi, everyone. My name is Troy Walcott. I am one of 1,800 members of Local 3. Previously worked for Time Warner Cable. Now, when Spectrum Cable came and took over in 2016, the union workforce was attacked, and they looked to take away our medical and retirement benefits, so we ended up going on strike. We soon found out it was unlike a normal strike where the company was looking to try to lower the benefits alone and the compensation. They wanted to get rid of the union completely. So myself and my coworkers banded together and came up with the idea, being that we built out the system over the last 40 years. We know how to do it. Let's get together and then move out Spectrum and have the city own the system. And then once the city, we came together, put a business plan to try to have the city take over and own the system. That way it will provide equitable jobs for us and better service for the customers. When we didn't get enough response from that, we came up with the next idea of where we're at now, of having a multi-stakeholder cooperative, where the employees, us, the people that built the system, and the customers who use it can join together and own the system, thereby taking out the middleman, and we can reduce the amount of customers' bills and also provide stable jobs for our employees and now owners of the company who built out the system. And that's where we're at today.
Amazing. And this is part of a long legacy of, on the one hand, sorry? This is part of a long legacy of big utility companies.
No, I don't know how long you want me to go on that part. This is just doing this.
Troy, are you there? Okay, let's move on to Austin Roby of Ampled.
Hi, I'm Austin. I'm a co-founder of Ampled. Ampled is a web platform for direct recurring community support of musicians. We're based, actually we have workers all over the world, mostly in New York though. And what we are doing as a web platform is having an alternative web structure or ownership structure to the current default, which is venture capital ownerships. And I think what the project that we're probably most similar to would be Patreon, which is primarily venture capital owned. And the question is, who generates value and who captures it? So Patreon is now valued at billions of dollars now. And the question is, what would that company be worth without the creators? So in our ownership structure, we have artist owners who become artists after achieving 10 supporters through the platform, and worker owners, which really is functioned more like a collective of people that come together in kind of like a flexible work environment, all working to build, most all with other full-time jobs coming many times from pandemic layoffs from other crowdfunding platforms as well. And we have 130 or so community members as well that support the platform.
Excellent. And I confess to being one of those community members. You can be one too. Thank you for introducing what you're up to. Let's turn a little bit toward the possibilities that employee ownership, worker ownership of different sorts unlocks. You're talking to people who are exploring the possibility of worker ownership for themselves. What does it enable you to do that you couldn't have done otherwise? What does it enable you to do that other businesses in your sector might have trouble doing? What advantages does this strategy unlock? Does anybody want to begin?
I'd be happy to start.
Great.
So obviously I'm not speaking as a worker owner of Up and Go, but working closely with the worker owners and learning about what their experience had been before joining a cooperative. Most of the domestic work cleaning industry is kind of done independently. And also learning about the issues that other companies, including those like tech companies that have been entering the home cleaning space, learning from customers and workers about what the issues there had been. There's a lot of stability that comes with being a worker owner. So something that when we were initially doing user testing and ideation for the platform with consumers that we kept hearing was like, I don't know who's going to be coming to my house. Part of the insistence on using rating systems and algorithms that assign wages and work based on those algorithms was like a proxy for trust, because there was this sense that like, oh, kind of anyone can download this app and maybe there's some vetting, but they might be doing a bunch of other gigs, and how good are they at cleaning, and will I be, if I like them, can I work with them again? And I think that, something we saw initially, what we saw as a barrier of like, if we don't use these kinds of rating systems, how will we, like, what are people looking for with those ratings? And we realized it was trust. And once we could explain to them, like, the person coming to your house co-owns this company. They really want to do a good job because their whole business depends on you coming back. And if you have an issue, like, you can find them because they have a name and they are a co-owner, and we will connect you to them again. So I think that's the first thing that comes to mind about giving workers a stake, or workers creating their own stake in the company, creates stability and better quality service for everyone.
Troy, are you back with us?
I hope so.
Great. What does worker ownership enable you to do that you couldn't do otherwise?
One of the big things is being able to have control. Most people, especially if you look at it during the pandemic, pandemics, strikes, anything that normal workers go through on a daily basis, the things that gives them their fare on the job every day, of whether or not the employee is going to be able to unrightfully take away the employment that they worked and say took years to build up. Having control over that gives you a sense of relief, and it also gives that pride of ownership. Same thing as the difference between someone, say, when you rent a house as opposed to when you own it. It seems to add a different level of involvement in the product that you're putting forward. So for us specifically, we spent 40 years building out the entire cable system for New York City. And we never had a strike or issue with employers, and we also had a focus on serving the customers. And then someone comes in and decides, instead of serving the customers, they want to focus more on profits and stakeholders. We don't agree as the employees, and we built it out, but now we have no control and say so over how things progress moving forward with that company. Being the owners and having ownership now over what we built would be a different story. Instead of someone being able to take it away from us, we have control over that system. And involving the customers and having them have control of that as well gives them the opportunity to say, hey, we don't want our cable bill raised because of XYZ so our CEO can get profits, or we're willing to invest in our cable system because we want to see higher quality. Having that sense of control from both ends, both as employees and the people that are building the system, having ownership there where we can stabilize our jobs and also help the customers, and the customers having it from that end where they could kind of control the quality of service and how much they pay for it. That has a big different aspect than what we were used to before.
fantastic. And there's a long history of rural telecoms being owned as cooperatives among the people who use them, because big companies didn't want to go to rural areas. But it's so important, so exciting to see co-ops like this starting to form in urban areas that are also profoundly underserved and poorly served. And another feature of people's choice here that Troy is just talking about is this idea of multi-stakeholder ownership, so that you might have employees as co-owners, but also customers and other stakeholders even. And Austin's project Ampled is doing that as well. This is a growing trend in the cooperative and employee ownership movement, and it may be an option that you want to consider. Austin, do you want to say a bit about how worker ownership allows you to stand apart in your industry?
Yeah, I think, beyond just dignity and pride, there's for both working musicians and on the other side of Ampled are tech workers who also happen to be musicians mostly. Both groups never get a seat at the table. There's no artist on the board at Spotify. There's no level of ownership at any streaming platform. I think it's one of the most kind of like exploited groups of cultural producers. And then what COVID ended up showing was at a lot of startup and tech companies, companies that, even the good ones that, would say you're our family or whatever, would suddenly lay off a lot of people. And no one ever had a say in any of those decisions. So I think like it really showed to a lot of people that are now working with Ampled, just the asymmetry of power and decision making that exist at tech companies, and how powerful it could be to just co-own it with a group of people that you're working together with.
All right. Now, a question that might be on people's minds here isn't tech something that only big companies that take over the world can do, right? This is the logic of venture capital that tends to fuel the internet economy, right? That in order to build an app, you need to scale to millions of users. You need to take on lots and lots of early investment, hand the company over to those investors rather than workers or users. And technology, to be done right, has to be done really big and with lots and lots of investor money. What would you say to a fellow entrepreneur who says that, who thinks that that's how you have to do it? How is your relationship with tech different because of your use of worker ownership? And that can go to anybody. We can break the order a little bit. Troy?
Yeah, I was going to say that's one of the big things, the obstacles that were in front of us when we first started, because even for us, we worked and built a system, but actually having for a while, I thought the cable companies, when you think of Spectrum and Verizons of the world, I thought they were the internet until you get further into it and you realize that it's most of this is powered by the people. Even for them to be able to provide the service, the power behind it comes from the people. If you can get enough people together with a determination to get something done, then you can go and have the resources made available to you to be able to supply it. The biggest barrier from people being able to have options in internet service was these big companies, because they had the money and capital to build out the infrastructure. Well, in our case, they took it over. But that was the one thing that would stop any competition. Because of improvements in technology, we were able to use antennas that provide line of sight transmission to remove that barrier of the high cost of entry to build out the system, and put rooftop antennas that can provide high quality service the same way as the underground lines were built out. So removing that economic barrier made us able to be able to provide this service to low income areas and underserved areas on a rapid deployment. So So one thing I would say that kept that going is persistence. So the availability and the knowledge might be there, the technology might improve, but you also have to have someone persistent enough to go behind it and kind of bring all that together.
Fantastic. So identifying appropriate technologies that you could deploy given your capital access. Yeah. Sylvia or Austin? Austin, it looks like.
I'll jump in. Yeah, this it's kind of like a well-defined Silicon Valley bias of a lot of VCs find companies that don't, if you make less than $100 million a year, you're not interesting to a lot of VCs, and that the goal is typically to monopolize as big of an addressable market as possible. I think, even in Ample starting a cooperative, I think we still had trouble shaking some of these or unlearning some of these ideas. Like, we still want it to be big and serve as many people as possible, but at the same time, operating outside of venture capital funded framework, we've also kind of realized that creates new opportunities for how we define success for ourselves. So, one of those that's kind of been a driving decision for saying Ampled is just for musicians. That we have a representative governance, and if there's podcasters or YouTubers or stand-up comedians on the board, maybe they wouldn't represent musician interest as well. Yeah, we've also been kind of like landing on this metaphor of like a neighborhood bar, a platform as a neighborhood bar, which can be its own institution to a certain number of people and can be really important community place. But the goal could be just to keep the lights on, to keep serving its community, as long as people get together and have fun and there's enough money to keep the lights on.
Yeah. And I'll just add, I think that, at this point, every company and every worker is using technology, and a lot of companies that fashion themselves as tech companies, their product or their service isn't actually the technology, right? So Uber, yes, there is some complexity to developing technology that does dispatching, but other technologies have been doing that very well in New York City for a long time. And no matter how well the service is, if you don't actually have the driver taking you somewhere, you're not interested in the company, right? The bigger competitors like Handy that do home cleaning, if the home cleaning isn't good, it doesn't matter how easy it was to book or how quickly the person was able to be assigned. And I think like getting through some of that like mystique, that somehow this is magical and we haven't figured out how to do this before. It's just, a lot of these communications technologies we're all using anyway. And in the case of Up and Go, there was custom technology that we built, but we also didn't try to reinvent what was already working. And I think it was really important in particular for us to make sure, the worker owners on Up and Go, many of them are still building out their tech literacy and working on tech accessibility issues. And so, if they have WhatsApp systems that are working really well for them for assigning work, we didn't necessarily need to recreate that, right? And then thinking about some of the more complex tools we were building on the consumer facing side, like I went through my own process when I started of feeling like, oh, I don't know the right words, or I have some gut instincts about how I think this design should work, but maybe I'm not equipped and I should defer to some of the experts. I'm like, I use this technology all the time, but it's not, what we're doing isn't that complicated. You're trying to meet up with someone who's going to provide a service to you. We all have a sense of how we use these things, and whether or not you use whatever tech jargon of the day is there, it doesn't mean you don't understand the underlying concepts. And all of that stuff serves as barriers to keep immigrants, people of color, women from trying to take ownership and control of these tools that we all use constantly all the time in our lives.
Yeah, you know, what you were saying made me think of this line from the venture capitalist Mark Andreessen, that software is eating the world. And the goal of a lot of the venture-backed business models is to eat the world in some way, you know, to take over some chunk of the world. Whereas often cooperative and employee-owned businesses are actually trying to take advantage of what's already in the world, to cultivate it, develop it, and empower the human capital that's already all around us, rather than trying to replace it with something else that can be centrally controlled. So it really requires thinking about scale differently. And you know, Austin, I like how you talked about that that reframing of the question about what the goal is, what kind of space, what kind of metaphor we're using. Now, here we're on a call with those who are working with the city and different organizations to provide support for businesses that are looking to become employee owned. Every business of any kind exists in an ecosystem, never isolated, never on its own, however much the founders might like to take all the credit. I'd love to hear a little bit from each of you about the ecosystem around you, and what kind of support you've gotten in your journey, and how how you'd encourage others exploring these kinds of models to find the support that they may not be getting from the usual suspects that they might turn to as business owners or as employees or entrepreneurs. What support have you relied on, and you know, where would you point people? Troy, go ahead.
For us, I would say the biggest thing is to put yourself out there as much as possible. So going through the normal channels, like because you have the name cooperative behind you, for some reason, all the cooperatives are successful. I think there's a little bit of stigma when you have to go to a traditional bank to look for funding in order to try to push forward to start a cooperative. But then you put it forward to the actual people that have to use it. Employee ownership, the narrative behind that, when people think of it, is something that people always want to be a part of, or also always want to invest in. The problem is being able to take what that want that people have to be able to. One of the things that we had, once you put yourself out there and let people know what we were doing and the idea, people loved it, and more people want to support and help you just because they want to see it succeed, and it's something that they can see being helpful to them moving forward. So some of the biggest things that we did, and it was hard for us as well, because we were dealing with trying to start a company while also having March 28th just marked our 4th year anniversary of being on strike. So trying to do those two things simultaneously was very difficult, especially when related to our strike. Our strike is against one of the biggest media companies in the city. So any type of coverage or any type of news that would let more people know about us is definitely crushed by that company. Like you could just think about it. We've been on strike in 4 years, and now New York One is now Spectrum News. You would never hear about it. You'll never know we were even on strike. So being able to constantly connect with people and speak with people, we were able to connect with several groups like Rebecca Laurie's group. We have help from Blip, who's a tech law group that was able to work and help us build this out. Some of the people that are the tech background, like Sasha Meinrath, built out some of this. The point is, the more and more that you put yourself out there and let people know your story, the more that you'll find people who believe in your idea and want to see you help. And that is kind of the way that we found, not through the traditional means of being able to pull funding in, but we were able to find other ways. Eric Foreman was able to connect us. We had the sales leader to be able to do this job there, because money that was put in specifically to try to serve underserved areas, specifically in the Bronx. So they had the money to build it out, but they didn't have the staff to do it, and we were the staff. So because we put ourselves out there, we were able to get the funding to start that and move it forward. So my main thing is to try to say, is no matter how small you think that meeting or thing may be, push that out.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on the ecosystem before we wrap up? Yeah, Austin.
I'm definitely very grateful for the support, at least the recognition that New York City gives to these people looking to start cooperatives or employee-owned businesses, because there's often not too much information online, or it can be difficult to access some information or just talk to someone. Yeah, Ample has utilized help from the Worker Cooperative Business Development Initiative, with help from CUNY, Community and Economic Development Clinic, and that's just been super critical to us. Not that this, can solve all problems of funding platforms and getting them off the ground, but I think like there is a lot that New York does that's really helpful. And there's also just a lot of people within the community of New York City network of worker cooperatives. So I think it's good to just meet other people that are working in the same space too.
Yeah, I'll just build on that and say absolutely. The Worker Cooperative Business Development Initiative and funding from New York City to support cooperative development. Also, New York City network of worker cooperatives, and for CFL to be connecting with other organizations that are thinking about developing co-ops, and then for Up and Go to and its member cooperatives to be able to continue to connect and brainstorm and create different kinds of spaces for worker cooperatives to share what their challenges are. There are also other kinds of business networks that we've seen the worker cooperatives get involved in, going to events with like local chambers of commerce or other, small business services events. I think, community organizations, especially for making connections when you're first trying to get into the market, have been really important. There are a lot of people who I think especially we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, right, are like asking more questions about how the decisions they make day to day about where they shop, what kinds of businesses and organizations they can support, like what they can do, and they don't always know where to start, but there's really active groups of people. So, neighborhood associations, local groups throughout Brooklyn and throughout the city have been really important to the growth of Up and Go. And also, CFL itself is a community-based organization that provides all kinds of community-based services. We partner with other community-based organizations to recruit and organize worker owners in different neighborhoods and make sure that we can build those connections, starting from where people really have those trusting relationships, so that we can continue to bring more folks into the business. So those are some of the relationships, but certainly not all.
All right, well, let's do thank you so much, a little lightning round here, just to tell everybody where they can learn more about you and get involved, 10 to 20 seconds each. Troy, you want to get us started?
Okay, so right now we are pushing a project where we're trying to provide service to underserved areas in the Bronx, a coalition built between People's Choice Communications, Metro IF, and Block Power to sustain that, and peopleschoice.coop. You can go on that site and it gives a little bit of information about us directly, but it's also part of what we're trying to push out for that project to provide that service in those areas right now.
All right, fantastic. Sylvia?
All right, so you can learn more about Up and Go at upandgo.coop. You could book a cleaning there, home cleaning or office cleaning. Maybe your business needs some of those services, but you can also read more about our history there. And if you want to learn more about Center for Family Life and what we do, you can go to centerforfamilylife.org.
Excellent. Finally, Austin.
If anyone wants to learn more about Ampled, ampled.com, we have a page in our footer on how to help. And anyone could follow us on Instagram or Twitter.
Okay, thank you. Turn it over to you, Antu.
Thanks, Nathan. And thank you, Troy, Austin, and Sylvia for joining us today and sharing your very inspiring stories of the businesses that you're growing and nurturing. So we'll pass it on now to Alice at The Working World, who will tell us a little bit more about the Owner to Owners program. You'll have the opportunity to learn more about what the things are offered, if you will, the services provided by groups like The Working World, which is a partner of Owner to Owners, as well as ICA Group and BachNet. So I'll turn it over to Alice.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for being here. My name's Alice Maggio, and I'm with The Working World. If you have questions, now's the time to put them into the chat for the question and answer session, which is coming up. Thank you, Nathan, Sylvia, Troy, and Austin for the conversation we just had. I just learned a lot, and it's so cool to see all this worker co-op and consumer co-op and every kind of co-op activity in New York City. So I wanted to tell you a little more about the Owner to Owners Hotline and the Employee Ownership NYC initiative, which is kind of why we're all here today. So the benefits to businesses, workers, and industry that we've heard today, including improving your business's resilience and stability, as well as some other advantages for a business owner who might want to sell their business to their employees, such as earning a fair market price for their business or your business, and tax breaks for selling to your employees. These are all real advantages that are actually achievable. And Owner to Owners is here to help you reach those benefits. Do you want to go to the next slide? So what does this actually look like? How does it work? Owner to Owners is part of this larger initiative called Employee Ownership NYC, which also encompasses the Worker Co-op Business Development Initiative that was just mentioned earlier, and other support that the city offers to cooperative businesses specifically. So this is a city-funded program that's designed to ensure that you, the business owner, and your employees and the community at large can continue to benefit from the incredible businesses that you've built in our city. We provide, so we have a number of partners that Antu just mentioned. And as a whole, we're experts in providing services to businesses that want to convert to worker ownership or employee ownership. We provide these services at no cost. And we start by trying to determine if employee ownership is the right fit for your business and for the future of your business. And then if it is, the services that we can provide include business valuation, so you can understand what your business is worth, access to capital to help you execute the sale of your business to your employees. An initial consultation and eligibility assessment is how we do those things. And then guidance through the sale process. And also one really key part is training and education for the owners, managers, and employees to support that successful transition from maybe the founding owner to the employees. And we provide a lot more beyond that. But that's kind of the general overview. You can go on to the next slide. So to find out if employee ownership is right for you, you can give us a call, or you can visit ownertoowners.nyc. Our services, again, are offered at no cost to the business owners or employees, and business owners or employees can give us a call and we can start the exploration together. You can call us at 646-363-6592 to get started, or again, you can go to that website. And I think that's it for me. And now we can move on to the question and answer period. And Shelley's here from ICA Group, and we can both answer questions as well as our panelists. I'll hand it back over to Antu.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Shelley. So now we have a few questions that have come up, and if you have any more, whether to the panelists or to our experts, our technical assistance experts themselves, please put them in the Q&A chat. So we'll get to the first question, which is who makes what decisions and how do you keep decision making from slowing growth? This is a general question, so why don't we start with Shelley and Alice, and then if any of the panelists want to add in how they do it with their company, please do chime in.
You start us off, Shelley.
You're muted, Shelley.
Make sure I understand the question. How do you deal with growth? Is that what you said?
The question is who makes what decisions and how do you keep decision making from slowing growth?
Okay, I got you. So in a cooperative, it depends on what type of decision it is. So there's two different, you can say, areas of decision. So one is kind of policy governing decisions, and the others are operational management decisions. If it's a governing, establishing something with policy or something that's going to have a great impact on the whole organization, like say you want to move locations or open a second location, then that would be the board typically. Um, if it's a decision about something having to do with just the, everyday uh, operations, how large or small inventory you should maintain, that would probably be the manager if you have a hierarchical structure. Um, when it is a board decision, usually in a co-op, they will also come to the co-op members for that kind of large decision and have them vote on that decision. So they can delegate certain things so the board can make the decision alone, but when it's going to have a great impact, it's probably going to be something that you want the membership to vote on. And that's the one member, one vote. And I guess that's like the most efficient way of making those decisions. I'll let Allison jump in.
And I think the only thing I would add is that the board of directors is elected by the members, usually on a one person, one vote basis.
I could chime in and just actually just pull up a doc if that's cool and just share for a second. Can y'all see this? This is how Ample approaches decision making, where we have a decision making matrix where we've cataloged all of the different kinds of decisions that we would make, and then said who is responsible for making these decisions, and then outlined different kinds of decision types that are associated with each decision. So this is like kind of custom to us, but it's been helpful to just write down the decisions that we're making, because I think if we didn't do that, they might just default back to like a traditional hierarchical way of making decisions.
Yeah. And I'll just add that I think every business and organization should, to be able to effectively run, have, some groups that have autonomy to make decisions and respond to things quickly. So, if we're getting customer feedback from Up and Go that a certain tool isn't working, or we're seeing there's ways we could revise things, unless there's certain ways that'll directly affect worker owners' work, or, rub up against an existing policy, there's a group that's, empowered to make those kinds of changes to features. Big questions that are going to affect worker owners' livelihood, those should necessarily take a little bit longer or involve more people. And I guess, as a co-op person, I'll just say I struggle with the framing of the question a little bit, because I think we've all been in hierarchical organizations where there's bureaucracy that takes a long time, or someone makes a decision without consulting people who are going to have to carry it out, and it doesn't end up working, and that takes longer. So I do think there's a little bit of a myth that democracy is inherently slow or can't lend itself to scale, whereas like really what matters is just clarity about who's making the decisions.
Yeah, and what I would add is that ICA's approach, we do kind of use a matrix. Everybody doesn't have to, and it can be much simpler, but it is a good idea. We kind of use a matrix, and it has things like, the impact, and the decisions that fall under impact, or operations and decisions, and who you want to make those decisions. But a big part of it, as is true with any organization, is that you do need to build a level of trust and have trust, so that you are willing to delegate some decisions to keep things flowing, and that's true regardless of whether it's a democratically set up organization or a traditional organization.
Thank you all. Troy, do you want to add how you do decision making?
A lot of our decision making right now is more of abstract thought than actual implementation. We're waiting to we want to bring enough customers online so they can bring out and add to the missing part. So multi-stakeholder cooperative, but the employees right now building out the system, And we want to, bring in enough customers and community organizations to add that. But the thought behind it is each organization would have the same thing, a kind of democratic vote, more like not for the user side, not person to person, but maybe several persons will elect a representative. We elect a board to make major decisions that happen for changes in the company, also a management staff. And the only difference is just like in the cooperative, the organizations that put the board in place would decide on a regular basis if they perform well enough to stay in place and be hired or fired by those different groups.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing.
The balance is kept because one side is workers and one side is employees.
Thank you all for sharing. So I think we have room for maybe one or two more questions. The next question, which I think is always a really important one, especially in the tech industry, is what fundraising options and strategies are available to support building out a tech platform? Anybody want to start?
I can start.
Well, at least for our end, I could speak of, go ahead. I think that was Sylvia, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Troy. I'd just say in our case, we're very fortunate that because we're a nonprofit that's supporting incubation of worker cooperatives, we did have philanthropic support from Robin Hood Foundation to seed the platform. And, our work is also supported by the City of New York and other foundations that support us. And I think in the case of workers who are working in traditionally low wage sectors, a lot of times the reality is right now that philanthropy can be a great source for them. Most companies that get started, especially tech companies, either it's venture capital or there's a lot of friends and family fundraising. And so if people are not in networks of very wealthy people, it makes sense that there's a place for, other forms of less extractive investment to fill that gap.
One of the great funding sources on our side was, like I said, it was a philanthropic effort for people seeing a need or a problem that had to be fixed and investing in that. And that small investment was able to help us enough to get started where we can build out and have subscriptions and have people now contribute to add funding to what's being built. That in conjunction with the digital divide was highlighted so much that the government is actively now moving to put funding into trying to build out exactly and fix the problem that we have and invest in companies like ours that are big based and trying to fix the problems within those communities. So the combination of those two should be able to help us keep funding going. And then from there, the people that are being served will keep the funding going.
How to fundraise for a cooperative platform? There's no answer for that. There's like a funding ecosystem that matches those needs doesn't really exist. So I would say good luck, but I think Ampled has cobbled together what we can from like many different sources, from incubators, pitch competitions, loans from friends, a grant here or there, but not like philanthropic grants, like grants from like other internet companies. I think, the missing piece to me feels like a need for venture capital investment groups that are directed by collectives of workers. I haven't really seen that as much. That feels like a missing piece that I would like to see.
Alice, do you want to add in, or Shelley, in terms of what financing might look like for platforms? Especially, yeah.
I think Austin made the point. I think it's varied in all these different sources. I don't know if I heard anybody, mention crowdsourcing. types of activities in particular, but I think that also needs to be thrown in a pot. There are a lot of these new groups coming on saying they wish to be impact investors. Of course, you do have to look carefully at who they are, but there are more and more of those coming on saying they have an interest in employee owned, you know, investing and supporting the development of employee ownership. So that's another source.
And the working world has a loan fund that we make loans to co-ops with. So we offer what we call non-extractive finance, and the loans are paid back out of profits. So it's not a typical term loan, but the loans are paid back once the company reaches profitability. So that's an option for both startups and also for conversions. So companies that want to sell to their employees, but the employees might not have the money to buy the company right away. So we finance that transition. So people can reach out to us at the Working World for things like that.
Great. And then Nathan also added in the chat that start.coop is working to develop a tech-ready capital source. So check that out at start.coop /invest /. So that concludes our session today on social tech and employee ownership. Thank you all for joining us and for taking the time to do so. Thank you to Deputy Mayor Thompson and Amalgamated Bank for helping us convene this event. Special thanks to Nathan Schneider and our panelists, Sylvia Morse, Austin Roby, and Troy Walcott. And I hope that this was fruitful and that everyone learned something. Thanks again. Please reach out if you're interested to owner2owners.nyc or call us at the hotline.